Lashmaka was a young woman living in a small, modest house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood. She lived with her stepmother, Shazia, after the untimely death of her father when she was just a child. Shazia had remarried soon after, and Lashmaka had been forced to adapt to a new life. A life where her feelings often seemed to take a back seat to the wishes of her stepmother. Although Shazia provided for her, their relationship had never been one of warmth. To Lashmaka, her stepmother was more of a controlling figure than a caring mother, and the lack of genuine affection from Shazia only deepened the gap between them. Lashmaka was a reserved, introspective young woman. She often found herself daydreaming about a different life, one filled with love, freedom, and the chance to make her own choices. However, her reality was far from those dreams. She'd always been the dutiful daughter, obedient and quiet, fulfilling whatever role was expected of her, even if it meant suppressing her own desires. She had long resigned herself to this life, never imagining that anything would ever change. Then one day, without any prior warning, Shazia announced that she had arranged a marriage for Lashmaka. The man's name was Usman, and although he was a well-known figure in their town, he was considered poor by most standards. Lashmaka was taken aback. She barely knew anything about him, and the idea of marrying a stranger, especially one whom her stepmother had chosen, filled her with confusion and hesitation. She had always dreamed of a love story of her own, one where she had the freedom to choose her partner, not someone picked for her by someone else. But now, all those dreams seemed to be slipping away, as the weight of her stepmother's decision began to settle on her shoulders. Would she accept this arranged marriage, or fight for the life she had always longed for? The wedding was nothing like Lashmaka had imagined. It was simple, far simpler than any wedding she had ever dreamed of. The small hall was filled with a few guests, mostly relatives and distant family friends, but there was no grand celebration, no joyful atmosphere. The air was thick with formality, and Lashmaka couldn't help but feel the heavy weight of obligation pressing down on her. Her stepmother Shazia had orchestrated every detail, leaving little room for Lashmaka's own desires. The ceremony itself was brief and devoid of the warmth that one might expect on such an important day. Lashmaka's heart wasn't in it, but she played her part, as she always had. She said the vows, smiled for the photos, and allowed herself to be guided through the motions by her stepmother's unspoken demands. It was clear this marriage wasn't something Lashmaka had chosen, but it was the path she had to walk now. Usman, the man she had just married, was introduced as a humble, soft-spoken mechanic. He was dressed in modest clothes, his appearance unremarkable. Certainly not the type of man Lashmaka had imagined herself with. She had expected someone more polished, someone whose status matched his wealth. But Usman had a quiet strength about him, an aura that made her wonder if there was more to him than met the eye. His eyes, in particular, held a depth of knowledge that intrigued her. Something about them seemed far beyond his supposed humble background. There was a mystery in them, a story untold, that made Lashmaka uneasy, yet curious. That night, as they settled into their new home, Lashmaka couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The wedding night, usually a time for celebration and closeness, felt cold and distant. Usman was kind, even gentle, but he remained strangely aloof, keeping to himself most of the time. He didn't seem excited or even particularly happy about their union, which made Lashmaka uneasy. He was polite but distant, not the affectionate, eager husband she had expected. He seemed like a man who had long ago learned to keep his emotions in check, a man with layers that were impossible to peel away. Lashmaka couldn't help but feel disconnected, like a stranger in her own marriage. She had imagined her wedding night would be filled with the warmth of a new beginning, but instead she felt a cold emptiness between them. Usman didn't act like someone who came from a poor background. His behavior, his mannerisms, everything about him suggested that he was used to a different life, a life Lashmaka could only guess at. The more she observed him, the more questions arose in her mind. Why had her stepmother chosen him? What was his true story? Lashmaka had no answers, only a growing sense of unease. She wondered why Shazia had arranged this marriage. Was there something about Usman that Lashmaka didn't know? She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this man than his quiet demeanor and humble occupation. The night wore on, and the questions in Lashmaka's mind only grew. She couldn't help but wonder what lay hidden beneath the surface of her new life, and whether the truth about Usman would soon be revealed, or if she would have to dig for it herself. As the days passed, the initial unease Lashmaka felt on her wedding night began to deepen into something more unsettling. Usman's behavior grew increasingly strange, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something from her. During the day, he was quiet, almost withdrawn, spending his time at the small mechanic shop where he worked. But it was at night that things truly puzzled her. Usman would often leave the house after dinner, disappearing into the darkness without a word. Lashmaka would stay awake, waiting for him to return, but by the time she drifted to sleep, he would usually still be absent. The long hours he spent away, the late-night disappearances, made Lashmaka wonder where he was going. What was he doing, and why did he never tell her? The most troubling part, however, was his work. Lashmaka had expected him to be a successful mechanic, bringing in enough money to support their new life together, but that didn't seem to be the case. His business didn't seem to be thriving as she had imagined it would. There were no new cars being worked on, no obvious signs of success in the shop. He was always tinkering with the same old vehicles, struggling to make ends meet, yet he never seemed concerned about their financial situation. Lashmaka couldn't reconcile this image of a poor, struggling man with the odd behaviors she was witnessing. Her curiosity grew, and with each passing day, the questions in her mind became harder to ignore. She had to know more about Usman's life before they were married. Feeling the weight of her suspicion, Lashmaka decided to confront her stepmother, Shazia, about it. Perhaps Shazia knew something more, something that would explain Usman's strange behavior. She brought up her concerns one afternoon, asking Shazia if she knew where Usman went at night, or why his work didn't seem to bring in much money. Shazia's response was swift and dismissive. "He's a good man, Lashmaka," she said with a reassuring smile. "He's hard-working and a suitable match for you. Don't worry about it." Shazia's tone left no room for further discussion, and Lashmaka was left feeling more confused than ever. Her stepmother's insistence on Usman's goodness only made Lashmaka's suspicions grow. If Usman was truly as good as Shazia claimed, then why did everything about him seem so off? Determined to uncover the truth, Lashmaka decided to take matters into her own hands. She began to follow Usman, quietly observing his movements when he would leave at night. She told herself it was just curiosity, but deep down, she knew there was something more, a nagging feeling that she couldn't ignore. One evening, she trailed him from a distance as he walked out the door after dinner. He didn't take the usual route to his mechanic shop. Instead, he headed toward the outskirts of town, where the streets became quieter and darker. Her heart raced as she followed him, keeping a safe distance. What could he be doing so late at night? She hadn't expected to see what she did next. Usman stopped in front of a sleek black luxury car parked on the side of the road. Lashmaka froze. This was impossible. How could a mechanic, a man who claimed to have nothing, afford such an expensive car? The car was far beyond the reach of someone in his supposed financial situation. She watched as Usman got into the car, and before she could blink, he was gone, speeding off into the night. Her mind raced with questions. Was this the life Usman had been hiding from her? How could he afford this car, and why had he never mentioned it? The next night, Lashmaka decided to follow him again, hoping for more answers. This time, she followed him to a small office building in the industrial part of town. She waited in the shadows, her heart pounding in her chest as Usman entered the building. She had no idea what he was doing there, but her instincts told her it was something important. As she waited, Lashmaka's attention was drawn to a nearby payphone. She was just about to turn away when she overheard Usman speaking in a foreign language on the phone. The conversation was heated, though Lashmaka couldn't make out every word. However, one thing was clear: he was discussing a large business deal. Lashmaka's breath caught in her throat. Usman wasn't just a mechanic, struggling to make ends meet. He was involved in something much bigger, something she hadn't even begun to understand. Her mind raced with questions, each one more troubling than the last. Who was Usman really? What was he hiding? And why had he kept all of this from her? As Lashmaka stood there, the mystery surrounding her husband only deepened, and she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to take a turn she hadn't expected. Lashmaka couldn't bear the tension any longer. The more she thought about everything she had discovered, the more she felt the walls closing in around her. Usman's mysterious behavior, his late-night absences, the luxury car. Nothing made sense. And every time she tried to ask him about it, he remained evasive, offering only vague answers that only deepened her suspicion. Her curiosity had led her down a dangerous path, but now it was time to confront him. She couldn't live in the dark any longer. She needed to know the truth. One evening, as Usman returned from another one of his late-night excursions, Lashmaka stood in the doorway, waiting. When he walked through, she didn't greet him with her usual quiet nod. This time, there was a fire in her eyes. Her heart raced as she walked toward him, her voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "Usman," she said, her voice cutting through the silence of the room. "I need the truth. What are you hiding from me?" Usman froze in his tracks. For a long moment he didn't respond. Lashmaka's gaze never wavered, and she could see the struggle in his eyes. He wasn't ready to reveal everything, but he knew it was inevitable. His shoulders slumped slightly, as though a heavy weight had settled on him. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and filled with regret. "Lashmaka, I never wanted to deceive you, but I had no choice. I'm not poor like I made you believe. I've been living under an assumed identity for years, hiding from a past that still threatens my life. My family, my real family, they're wealthy. Very wealthy." Lashmaka's heart skipped a beat. What was he saying? She could hardly believe it. The man she had married, the man who worked as a mechanic and struggled to make ends meet, was telling her that he was actually from a rich family. How could that be true? The confusion in her mind was overwhelming, but she held her ground, urging him to continue. Usman took a deep breath, as though gathering the strength to reveal the full extent of his secret. "My family comes from a powerful background. We own businesses, real estate, and investments. But when I was younger, we were targeted by a dangerous criminal organization. They wanted to control our assets, and they didn't care who got hurt in the process. My family became their prime target, and we were forced to live under constant threats. I couldn't bear to see my family suffer any longer, so I made a choice. I had to disappear, Lashmaka. I had to protect them. I left everything behind, my wealth, my position, my name, and started over. I lived a modest life, hoping that by staying under the radar, I could keep my family safe." Lashmaka stood in stunned silence, her mind struggling to process the enormity of what he was saying. She had known that Usman was hiding something, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. He had lived as a poor mechanic, hiding his true identity to protect his loved ones. But something still didn't add up. If Usman had left his family to protect them, why was he still being so secretive? And why hadn't he told her sooner? "Then why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and confusion. Usman's expression softened. "I didn't tell you because I was afraid. Afraid of what might happen if anyone found out who I really was. If the people who wanted my family dead knew where I was, they would come after us again. It's safer for everyone if they think I'm just a poor mechanic with no connections. But what about us? Lashmaka asked, her voice rising with frustration. What about our life together? What happens when you keep hiding the truth from me? He didn't have an answer. His eyes dropped to the floor, as if the weight of his decisions had finally caught up with him. Then, in a quiet voice, he added, "There's something else you need to know. The most shocking part of all this. My family. They've been looking for me. They want me to take over the family business. But I refused, Lashmaka. I can't go back to that life. Not while we're still in danger. And the worst part is, your mother." He trailed off, and Lashmaka's heart sank. "My mother?" she repeated, her voice a whisper. Usman nodded, his expression darkening. "Yes, your stepmother, Shazia. She worked for my family years ago. She knew who I was. She knew I was hiding, but she never told you. In fact, she's been using you to get to me, to get to my family's wealth. She arranged this marriage because she knew what I was running from, and she knew how much I could offer her. She's been manipulating everything from the start." Lashmaka's world seemed to crumble around her. Her stepmother, the woman who had raised her, who she had trusted, had been using her as a pawn in a game she didn't even know existed. It was a betrayal beyond anything Lashmaka had ever imagined. The woman who had always controlled her life had been using her all along, for her own selfish gain. Tears welled up in Lashmaka's eyes as the weight of the revelation hit her like a tidal wave. She had always thought Shazia's motives were harsh, but now she understood the true depth of her stepmother's manipulation. Lashmaka's head spun, her mind reeling with everything Usman had just revealed. Shazia had known all along that Usman was wealthy, and yet she had never said a word. Instead, she had pushed Lashmaka into a marriage she never wanted, all for the chance to tap into the wealth and power Usman's family held. "What do we do now?" Lashmaka asked quietly, her voice shaky. She felt lost, betrayed, and confused. Usman stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. "We have to stay hidden, Lashmaka. I need to protect you, protect us both. If my family finds out where I am, they'll try to bring me back into their world, and the people who are after us will stop at nothing to get to us. But I promise you, I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. We can figure this out, together." But despite his words, Lashmaka couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The man she had married, the life she had believed in, had all been a lie. And now, her stepmother, the woman who had shaped her life, was at the heart of the deception. Everything she knew was now in question. Lashmaka's heart pounded as she stood in front of Shazia, her stepmother. She could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on her chest, suffocating her, yet there was no turning back now. The lies, the manipulation, everything had finally come to light. And she wasn't going to let Shazia get away with it. "Shazia," she began, her voice cold and controlled. "I know everything. I know what you did, and I know what you've been hiding." Shazia's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked her surprise with a practiced smile. "What are you talking about, Lashmaka?" she asked, her voice smooth, almost too smooth. "What have you learned?" Lashmaka's fury bubbled to the surface, and she couldn't hold it in any longer. "I know about Usman. I know who he really is. He's not poor. He's from a wealthy, influential family, and you've known it all along. You arranged this marriage for me, not because you cared about me, but because you wanted access to his family's wealth." Shazia's face faltered for just a second, but she quickly regained her composure. She crossed her arms over her chest, as if trying to shield herself from Lashmaka's words. "Lashmaka, you're mistaken. I did this for you. I thought I was securing your future. You don't understand how important this marriage is. Usman is the key to a life of comfort and security. I was thinking about your happiness all along." Lashmaka shook her head in disbelief. The anger surged within her, her fists clenched at her sides. No, Shazia, you were thinking about your own happiness. You've been using me all this time. You knew exactly who Usman was, and you manipulated me into marrying him for your own selfish reasons. You never cared about what I wanted or who I loved. You only cared about his money, his power. Shazia's face hardened, and for a moment, Lashmaka saw a glimpse of the cold, calculating woman she had always been. She didn't seem at all remorseful. In fact, she almost seemed defensive, as if she was justifying her actions in her own mind. I did it for you, Lashmaka, she insisted, her voice rising in frustration. You didn't understand what was at stake. You were always so focused on your little dreams, your silly ideas about love and happiness. I arranged this marriage because it would set you up for life. I've worked for years to get us out of poverty, to give you a better future. And Usman is the way to do that. You should be thanking me. Lashmaka's chest tightened as the full weight of her stepmother's selfishness settled in. She felt betrayed, not just by Usman, but by the one person she had always thought she could trust. This woman, who had been a mother figure to her since her own father's death, had only seen her as a means to an end. It was all about what Lashmaka could give her, her connection to Usman's wealth, his family's power, his resources. Her voice cracked with emotion as she spoke again, barely able to contain her anger. You never cared about me, Shazia, not once. You used me to get to him, to get to his family's money. You didn't think about what I wanted or how I felt. You didn't think about how I had to live with the consequences of your decisions. Shazia scoffed, her eyes narrowing. You think I did all this for nothing? You think I wanted you to suffer? I did what I had to do to make sure you had a future, to make sure you didn't have to live like I did. You should be grateful. You should be thanking me for giving you a chance at a better life. Lashmaka felt a wave of disgust wash over her. Shazia's words felt hollow, empty, and the more she heard them, the more Lashmaka realized just how much she had been manipulated. There had never been any love in this arrangement, no care for Lashmaka's happiness or well-being. It was all about Shazia's ambition, her desire for wealth, and her need to climb the social ladder. She had never been the mother Lashmaka needed. Tears of frustration welled up in Lashmaka's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She stood taller, her voice firm as she spoke one last time. You never gave me the chance to choose my own path. You took that from me, and now I have to figure out who I am, without your lies controlling me. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Lashmaka stood there, her emotions a mixture of anger, confusion, and pain. She had spent her whole life trying to please Shazia, trying to be the obedient daughter, but now she realized that everything she had known about her family was a lie. The love and care she thought her stepmother had for her had never existed. Shazia said nothing, and the absence of her words was perhaps the most telling thing of all. She didn't apologize. She didn't offer any comfort. She just stood there, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. In that moment, Lashmaka understood that she would never find the support she had been hoping for in this woman. Shazia's priorities had always been herself, not Lashmaka. Lashmaka turned away, her heart heavy with the realization that her life had been manipulated by the one person she had trusted most. She had been living in the shadow of someone else's ambition. And now it was time to step out into the light, to forge her own path, one where she could finally choose her own future, free from the chains of her stepmother's control. As Lashmaka walked away, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of freedom. The truth had set her free. Lashmaka sat alone in the dim light of her bedroom, her mind racing with the weight of the decision she had to make. The life she had known was now in shambles. Everything had been turned upside down, and she felt as though she were standing at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take. On one side, there was the life that Usman's wealth could provide, a life of luxury, security, and comfort. On the other, there was a chance to break free from the manipulation that had defined her existence for so long, to build a future on her own terms, without the shadows of her past. Usman's words echoed in her mind. He had married her out of love, not because of the scheming of her stepmother. He had chosen her. The promise of his support, no matter what she decided, was still fresh in her heart. He had never asked her to stay with him because of his wealth, and the tenderness in his voice had made it clear that he truly cared for her. But as much as that comforted her, Lashmaka knew this decision was hers alone. It wasn't about what Usman could offer her. It was about what she wanted, what she needed to find peace within herself. She could no longer live in the shadow of others' choices. The truth about her stepmother had shattered the image of family and love she had carried for years. Shazia had manipulated her for her own selfish desires, using Lashmaka as a pawn to gain access to Usman's wealth and status. And now, Lashmaka had to ask herself, could she continue to live a life shaped by that manipulation? Could she go on, knowing that everything had been built on a foundation of lies? The thought made her sick to her stomach. She could no longer let her past dictate her future. She was not a pawn, not a tool to be used in someone else's game. She was her own person, with the right to choose her own path. Her mind drifted back to Usman. He had always been kind to her, even when she was distant and unsure. His patience, his willingness to listen, his quiet support, they had all made her feel something she had never felt before. Love. Real love. The love he gave her wasn't about wealth or status. It was pure, born from the heart. He had been honest with her about everything, including his past, and that honesty had earned her respect. It wasn't about the luxury or the money. It was about trust, respect, and freedom. Things Lashmaka had never fully understood until now. She had spent her whole life trying to live up to the expectations of others, her stepmothers, societies. But now, for the first time, she realized she had the power to choose for herself. As she sat on the edge of the bed, Lashmaka reflected on the life that awaited her with Usman. She could live in luxury, but at what cost? Was she willing to let her past continue to control her? Could she really live in a house built on manipulation and deceit, even if it offered her comfort? Number. She couldn't. Lashmaka knew that the only way to truly move forward was to reclaim her independence, to build a life where she didn't rely on anyone else's manipulation or control, a life where her happiness came from her choices, not from the wealth or the lies of others. She stood up from the bed, her decision clear. She would stay with Usman, but not because of his money or his family's power. She would stay because of his love, his honesty, and his respect for her. He had never pressured her into anything. He had always given her the space to be herself, and that was something she couldn't ignore. He had chosen her for who she was, not what she could bring to the table. As she walked toward the door to find Usman, her heart swelled with a sense of empowerment. She was no longer the scared, manipulated girl she had been. She was Lashmaka, the woman who could make her own decisions, who could take control of her future, and that was all that mattered. When she found Usman sitting quietly in the living room, she stood in front of him, her eyes filled with determination. He looked up at her, a soft smile playing at his lips. "I've made my decision," she said, her voice firm and steady. "I'm not going to live in the shadow of my past anymore. I don't need wealth or luxury to be happy. What I need is honesty, love, and respect. You've given me that, and that's enough for me. I want to be with you, not because of what you have, but because of who you are." Usman stood up, his expression softening. He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "Lashmaka, I've always wanted the same for you. I'm not asking for anything in return. I just want you to be happy, to feel free to live your life on your own terms." A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time it was a tear of relief, of freedom. Lashmaka had made her choice, and she knew it was the right one. I want to build my life with you, Usman, and I want to leave behind everything that has held me back, especially my stepmother. I'm ready to be free, and I want to be free with you. Usman pulled her into a warm embrace, holding her close. You have all the freedom you need, Lashmaka, and I'll be here, supporting you every step of the way. In that moment, Lashmaka realized that she had everything she needed. She had her dignity, her independence, and the love of a man who respected her for who she truly was. Together, they could face whatever challenges the future held, but for now, she was simply grateful to have control over her own life, her own destiny. The past was behind her, and the future was hers to shape. Lashmaka and Usman settled into their new life together, far removed from the chaos and manipulation of her past. The transition wasn't without its challenges, but it was one they faced hand in hand, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They created a life that was a beautiful balance of simplicity and comfort, where love and mutual respect took precedence over wealth or status. Usman's wealth no longer felt like a tool for survival or a symbol of power. It was simply a resource they used to build a peaceful, fulfilling life, where both their needs and dreams were respected. For Lashmaka, this new life was a revelation. She had once been trapped in a web of expectations, living under the influence of her stepmother's selfish desires. Now, she was free, not just from Shazia's control, but from the doubts that had once held her back. She embraced her newfound independence with confidence, knowing that her happiness was no longer dependent on others' approval or material gain. Instead, it was rooted in the freedom to make her own choices, in her ability to choose love over manipulation, and in her courage to forge her own path. As the months passed, Lashmaka found herself more empowered than ever. She began pursuing her dreams, taking small steps toward a future she had always desired but never thought was possible. Whether it was enrolling in a course she had always wanted to take or starting a small business, she discovered parts of herself she had long kept hidden. Each victory, no matter how small, was a testament to her resilience and the strength she had found within herself. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Lashmaka found herself reflecting on how far she had come. She thought about the girl who had been so lost, so unsure, trapped in the world her stepmother had designed for her, and she realized that she had finally become the woman she had always wanted to be, confident, free, and in control of her own destiny. In that moment, she knew that life wasn't about the wealth you had or the status you held. It was about the love you gave and received, the choices you made, and the strength to build the life you truly wanted. Lashmaka had learned the greatest lesson of all, that true power lies in making your own choices, no matter how difficult the path may seem.